bad? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It didn't wash with the other people I told either. So my family got this piece of property, and my mom and dad married. Dad was World War II man, and I'm the oldest in the family, so we moved in upstairs with my grandparents downstairs, my mother's parents. So I lived here until I was born in July. We moved to the first house on the right going up, we moved there. My mother said she thought it was either January or February of my 4th year. I would have been 4 years old had we stayed. So we were only in, shouting distance up the road. So that's how my ties are. And my family kept the land till my great uncle, who inherited it from his father, he passed away, and the land was sold out of the family. So to say all of that, this was a grand place for a child 3 to 4 years old to play. This was my castle. I had a castle here. I had, whatever I wanted it to be the day I got up. I was ready to go. But anyway, living here was quite unique. This is the front, and that is Jackson Road. The road you turn and came up here on is Dowdy Road, named for my great-grandfather. That road did not exist. So the Jacksons would come into a gate right down there and then drive up the hill, and the buggies and the carriages would let people off right here. There is a brick sidewalk under me. It goes almost out to the fence. So you're sitting inside, many of you are inside the porch. The porch is called peristyle, meaning it goes and circles the entire house. Some people said that this was might have been the first peristyle house in Alabama. There'll be others built in South Alabama later, and then there are a number of them down in Oak Alley along the Mississippi. But this house was first designed, according to family letters, was designed as just a big old wooden box. And then the porch and columns were added about a year later. The designer was an English-born architect named William Nichols. Now we know Nichols he grew up, of course, from England, comes to America, spent a good deal of time in Nashville because there was a great deal of wealth there. He designed houses around Nashville, Murfreesboro, Franklin, places like that. And then he made his way down to Huntsville and designed houses in Huntsville. James Jackson would eventually serve as president of the state senate. And so they had to have an architect to design the Capitol. The first Capitol got flooded, Cahaba. So they moved the Capitol to Tuscaloosa. And if you've ever been down there, I went to school down there, the Capitol grounds, part of it is still there. But so we know that William Nichols was hired by the state of Alabama to design that Capitol in Tuscaloosa. So we know James Jackson knew who he was, and we know for sure that Jackson hired him to finish this house. His signature is right here. At the bottom of the step, there is a curl. All of his houses had that same curl. At the top of the columns, there were wooden capitals. And on each corner of those capitals was that curl. On the staircase, which would be in the back, coming down, that curl was at the foot of the staircase on the handrail. So he signed his work with that curl. We also know that he was the architect of the first Muscle Shoals Canal that was built to try to bypass the Muscle Shoals. So, you're sitting on the porch, some of you, and then the rest of you are sitting inside. So this is a 4-room house with a dog trot. It went straight through the hallway. Parlor over here, master bedroom in that corner, dining room here with a kitchen detached outside. We have photographs of that kitchen in the 20s. My mother said it burned in the late 20s, the original kitchen. And then there was a guest bedroom in that corner. And then James Jackson and his wife had 10 children who lived to be adults, 5 and 5. And the house upstairs was divided with a main sitting area in the center, 2 bedrooms for the girls on one side, 2 bedrooms for the boys on the other side. And when I say 2 bedrooms, those rooms were big enough to put 4 and 5 beds in. I mean, they were huge. Growing up here, we could have, my sisters had all kinds of parties, spend the night parties, and my aunt was married here and had her reception here. So it was a wonderful experience to grow up here in the family. So, any questions? Anybody want to know anything about that part before we talk a little more about James Jackson? Anyone?
The upstairs layout?
Exactly like the downstairs. Two rooms over here, 2 rooms over there with a big center hall. Basically it. And it was just a big old box. This made it different. The columns, this made all the difference. Yeah.
The bank downtown, which is a replica, is that built to the same overall dimensions?
The bank down across from the park, the only real thing that's real as far as design is from corner to corner across the front. That's pretty much to scale. Now, no one knows where the original plans are. I've asked family descendants and they said they've never seen the original. But we know that during the Depression, because there were so many artists and engineers and architects out of work, the government hired them through WPA, PWA to come and take photographs and do floor plans of antebellum homes. So you can go through the Library of Congress and go onto their home survey site. You have to do a bunch of clicking, but you can get there. You go to Alabama, you can go into Lauderdale County, and there's about 20 homes that they surveyed, and this is one of them. They even took pictures in the attic. So that all the interior, what it would have been in the 30s, not today, yes.
Were there structures here that Doublehead built?
The only one we know for sure that was probably here for Doublehead would have been that cabin. Now, were there other structures? I don't know. If they were not there when I was little. But that cabin was arsoned by a group of teenagers in the 80s, 1980s. Archaeologists came and did a survey of that cabin and said that it was older than 1805. It had a dirt floor. So that's right in Doublehead's period. He had this was his property from the government from about 1805 or 6 all the way up to his death in 1809. Someone else? One of the things we know for sure, and if Curtis was here, she could verify this. James Jackson was born in Ireland, migrated to America because his family, I think there was 9 of those children. And in Europe, there was a rule or a law called the law of primogeniture. You ever heard of it? It simply said the oldest son got the entire estate. So James was in the middle. That meant all the siblings got money, but the oldest son got the property. So if you wanted to make anything of yourself, you had to leave, and that's how he comes to America. He already had a sister here and an uncle or 2. So the family pretty much, Ireland pretty much was depopulated, not only by the potato famine, but before the potato famine, by wealthy people, children coming to America to start their life. Now, I'm told, and I read this, more people are moving back to Ireland now than leaving Ireland. So pretty interesting. People like James Jackson, by the way, they were not poor. They were wealthy. He was college educated in Dublin, and he had a degree in civil engineering. So when he came to America, he settled first in Nashville. Met his wife there. She was already married at a very young age, like 17. She came from the Carolinas. I can't remember her exact location, but her great-grandfather had been the royal governor appointed by the King of England of the Carolinas. So she came from very high-bred, blue-blood stock. Her ancestral name was Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Only over there it's Moore, if you want to be proper. So she was a widow. Her husband had gotten killed in an accident. She already had a child. So when he married her, so he adopted her daughter, and then they had 10 more children. And a small child named Jane died in infancy. So they raised 10 kids to adulthood. And that adopted daughter married his nephew. So his nephew not only was his nephew, but was his son-in-law.
Oh, wow.
Kind of typical in the family. The Kirkmans. And the Kirkmans wound up living in Florence here. And he and that nephew, where we need to be heading next, were partners in the horses. And this is where I wish Curtis was here, because she is an authority. She has written a book on the horses from the Forks. And you also know it's fitting that today we're talking about the Forks of Cypress, because today is the running of what? The Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure what number. 150. Wow. Well, here's a fact. DNA has proven a lot of things. DNA has proven every single thoroughbred horse alive today in America is descended from one of the 3 horses from right here. Right here. The American Jockey Club, which keeps the records, said that there were 4 very important horses imported from Europe. 3 stallions and a mare. This man had 3 out of the 4. He had a stallion named Leviathan, he had a stallion named Glencoe, and he had a mare named Gallopade. From those 3 horses, every horse running today is descended. You don't get any better than that. That's pretty good. As my grandfather would say, that's in high cotton. That's it. So we know that he was a breeder of horses, and he had the 2 best stallions from England. At one time, he had a stallion in Nashville. His nephew kept a stallion in Nashville, and then 1 stallion stayed here. Glencoe was here, Leviathan was in Nashville, and they commanded $100 stud fee. Nobody else demanded that. Nobody. But they got it because everybody knew that the best horse flesh was right here. So it's interesting. It's kind of interesting and at the same time fitting that we're standing here on the day of the Kentucky Derby. And I think this happened one other time. So does that spur a question from anybody?
What was the book?
Her book is simply called The Thoroughbreds of the Forks. And where's Miss Linda? Linda back there?
Here I am.
Did we ever get any copies of that book?
The only ones I had, Miss Curtis brought out, and I just simply sold them. We don't have any at tourism.
Is it out of print again?
Not as far as I know. She
Okay.
brought us some.
Okay,
And
Curtis.
we sold them all.
Curtis wrote the book and he had it published, and I know it's been out of print for a couple of times, and she's had it reissued.
Yes.
But you could maybe I don't know. Tourism had them.
Yes.
You're
but
out.
We sold them all. So if anybody wants any, just let me know, and I will try to give them Miss Curtis and get
Okay.
them for you.
If you would like a copy of that book, see that lady right there, and let her get a name, and she'll talk to Curtis Flowers.
Yes.
All right. Another question.
What happened to the horses when the war broke out?
Okay. James Jackson died at the Forks in 1840. He died of complications from malaria and pneumonia. We know that malaria and yellow fever were prominent through here at one time. In his will, he said that his widow, Sarah Jackson, as long as she did not remarry, could stay in the house until she died. She died at 89, I think. Living, never had remarried. If she married, she got a child's portion of the will, remarried. We know that the horses were willed to the nephew. And in his will, he instructed the nephew to sell the horses within 5 years of his death. So all the horses were sold out of the family. Glencoe was sold to a gentleman in Lexington, Lexington, Kentucky, and he died in 1859, Glencoe. I think he was 32 years old. Horse was 32 years old and had sired over 500 foals. He was a busy horse.
Yeah.
And he is buried in Horse Park in Lexington, Kentucky. He is revered among thoroughbred breeders and thoroughbred historians. So, those horses were gone by the time the war came. However, the family did have descendants of those horses. We know that Colonel Mosby, General Mosby, the Gray Ghost, rode one of the horses from here. We know that another horse named Glencoe, a descendant of Glencoe, was captured, and he was captured in battle, and he wound up in the hands of Union General Sheridan. And if you go to the Pentagon, and I've never been to the Pentagon, but I've seen a picture of this, Sheridan is pictured in a painting on Glencoe. He's Glencoe the fourth, I think, third or fourth. So that horse flesh has been around the world. So, anything else? Yep.
I'm trying to remember what you had taught us here a few years ago. Weren't the horses moved north prior to the war?
Yeah, most of the horses were already moved north prior to the war to Kentucky. Most of them wound up there anyway, and they've never come back. They're up there. And you know, Kentucky is the bluegrass state, and it's known for its thoroughbred. But the thoroughbred line came from right here. Yes,
Didn't he bring those horses from another country?
yes, they were imported from England and Canada. Those from Canada came from England to Canada and then brought them here. But he was we know, according to Curtis, and again, I think Curtis said that he imported at least a dozen horses from Europe. And out of that dozen, 3 were phenomenal. So he had 3 of the top 4 horses at that time in the world. Doesn't get any better than that. I guess the only time you could have gotten better is had all 4, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Someone else? Now, I can't remember exactly. That horse was in Kentucky. It was a stallion in Kentucky. And Dominade, I think was his name, Dominade. But you can look it up. It's all over the internet. James Jackson and his nephew made quite a bit of money off the horses. Many of you have heard of the race, the match race. During the 1850s, one of the things that the competition, that since they didn't have football or basketball, they had horse racing. And of course, it's called the Sport of Kings, because at one time, that's all who could afford them. So they decided they would have match races, race the best horse of the North against the best horse of the South. They had 5 of these races, and the South won all 5. Then they stopped having them. But they had 5. The last one, the next to last one, was held in Long Island, New York. This gentleman's from Long Island, New York, right here. And they were, so how do you get the horse of the South versus, so they had competition races. Well, the horse that won the right to represent the South was born here. Her name's about that long. I can't pronounce it, but it's a place in Ireland. She won the right to represent the South at Petona Downs in Nashville. So they decided it'd be a good opportunity now to rename her, and they named her Petona. And she was a daughter of Glencoe. So they took her downriver to New Orleans, then across the Gulf to Savannah, Georgia, by boat. Then they walked her all the way from Savannah, Georgia to Long Island, New York, with a jockey and a groom. In those days, like today, it's a 1.25 mile race, I think. In those days, it was, I think, a 2-mile run. and you had to win 2 out of 3 heats. So to win it, you had to win twice. And she did. She won, beat the horse of the North. Her name was Fashion. And Courier and Ives did a print of that called The Greatest Race. The interesting thing was, more people watched that race than had ever watched a horse race before. And they even brought news from Long Island to New York by carrier pigeon. So they would read it off to the crowd in New York what was happening. So that made James Jackson's name nationwide, because here is a filly who would later be the bloodline. By the way, the bloodline comes through her and her father, Glenn Coe, of all those horses today. And it made an interesting thing was he was already dead at that time. This race was held in 1851, I think, or 52. So her descendancy made this place on the map. Anything else?
Her first name was Plum.
Glumdale Ditch or something.
From Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah. So we know James Jackson died in 1840, and when he died, he was the richest man in Alabama. He served in both houses of the state legislature, and had a great plantation here. And they raised cotton here, but it was never to be a cotton plantation. It was a thoroughbred plantation. They raised enough cotton to sell it for cash crop, but everything else went into the production of horses. Yes. James Jackson is buried in the cemetery, and we're going over there after this, for those that want to go. There are 3 cemeteries over there. We'll talk about that when we get over there, but there's 3 actual cemeteries. I'm just talking off the top of my head. Not left up here. On a Saturday morning, June the 6th, 1966, lightning struck in that corner right there. Where's Ty Duncan? Your dad is the one that told us the house was on fire. They lived in Mansion View. He pulled into our driveway, blowing the horn frantically. The Forks is on fire. My dad and I had just graduated from high school. I had just been down here about an hour before that, checking livestock. Got out of the shower, had a pair of shorts and t-shirt on, a pair of tennis shoes. I started out the door, my mother yelled, "Get the silverware." The silver chest was right in the dining room here. My dad and I got down here. The house was engulfed, already all over the top of the house. And we had a key, and as I reached for that door in the back, my dad said, "Do not open that door." The paint was already running down the door. Looked in the window, fire in every room. If you've never seen that photograph, there's a photograph taken by Carmel Olive Studio of the superstructure of the Forks on fire. That's what it looked like in about 35 minutes. It was a tinder box. It was all wood. And in an hour, it had collapsed inside. The reason we're missing a column is during the night of the fire, there were four chimneys, 2 on each side. 3 fell within the basement, 1 fell out and took that column with it. The columns have been restored. A group of people, of which I was lucky to be a part of, called the Forks of Cypress Committee, canvassed the countryside and notified all the living descendants they wanted to do something about saving and preserving this site. So, $350,000 later, the columns are preserved with copper tops so that the rain cannot get in. Some of the bases of the columns have been restored because the fire was so hot that it chipped off the limestone. So some of that has been restored, not all of them, but some of the worst ones have been restored. So now it's on the National Historical Register, and it cannot be changed. Nothing can happen here. Nothing can be built here. It stays like this until the Lord comes back. So, maybe this time somebody else will be doing this 2 or 20 years and you can send your grandkids. Someone else have a question?
What do you remember about
Yes, right here.
when it struck by lightning?
Struck by lightning. It's just a freak thing.
Tell us about the basement.
There was a dirt floor root cellar, and it was under the front half of the house. I'm 5'8". I could stand and touch the seals. My great uncle had the floor dug down a little bit more level, and it poured concrete. In this corner of that basement, there was a hand-hewn log where they salted their meat, and then the smokehouse was out in that corner over there. When I lived here, my mother said she always knew where I had been by what dirt I had on me. And I would go in that log, and that was my canoe. I'd stand in that canoe and paddle muddy. But getting in and out of that log, I was filthy. Anyway, that log was hand-hewn, probably about 10, 12 feet long, where they salted meat. But it was a root cellar. You only got in it by going outside. There are some 2 areas right over there and another one over here where you could go down in it. All the rubble from the house was pushed into the basement, then topsoil, and in what you see, you're sitting on turf.
Is there ever any thought to rebuild at that time?
The first gentleman that bought the house was a classmate of mine in high school, and he had the idea he was going to rebuild it, but he was told by engineers that the foundation was so badly damaged it could not withstand, in other words, it wouldn't pass inspection to redo a modern structure on what was so badly damaged. So all that kind of went out the window, and then in the process it was put on the National Register, and that eliminates any possibility of rebuilding. It's protected. Yes, ma'am. I think no. I don't think they had the technology here all right, the house was begun in 1819. Not sure of the date. The family moved in the winter of 1822. So they moved into the house, according to Curtis and other family members, before the porch was built. The porch was being built while they were still in the house. And so I think those bases were all turned perhaps in Nashville or Murfreesboro, somewhere where they had you can look at that. That's a solid block of limestone. And there are 24 of them. Can you imagine hauls? In those days where they had to haul. There was a quarry across the creek over here. And a lot of this limestone on the front, all around the house, was perhaps quarried over there. But that turning, no. And when you go to the cemetery, you're going to go see a solid stone wall. All of that was cut by hand. Somebody else? Yes. Okay. The touchy subject. The owners of the house made an agreement with the state of Alabama. The Alabama Historical Commission owns from the fence around. But the owners were smart. They kept control of how you get to it. Access is still owned by the owners. Inside the fence is supposed to be maintained by the state of Alabama, but some of you know how the state of Alabama operates. You know, whoever squeals the loudest is the one that gets greased, and I don't know for sure, but I doubt they have spent any money to maintain this place. I know that the family has a fund to keep up the cemetery. And I know for sure that the owners have mowed and kept this place up, which was not in the agreement. Anything else? Oh, yes.
You know, I noticed there was a concrete structure over in the corner here.
Okay.
Is that a cistern? Is that a...
The cistern was over here and it was pushed in. So I think that was, my uncle built that, and he was going to do my great uncle. The Forks became a tourist attraction, and my mother was the curator. And one of the things my great uncle wanted to do was have demonstrations of how things were done back then. And he bought a sorghum molasses mill, and he was going to put it out. We made molasses here a couple of years. I don't know about you, but I can testify because I did it. I will never, ever again grow sugarcane. If you've never been in a sugarcane crop, you can't breathe. It's so thick. It was grown in that creek bottom right over there. And we harvested it and brought it up here, and the blades cut like knives. I mean, it was horrible. So you had to cut it, lay it down, let it dry, and we set it on fire to burn the blades. And then brought it up here and ran it through the mill. It's hot because you had to cook that syrup. Oh, not a fun process. So when you buy molasses and corn syrup, no wonder it costs so much. It's like very intensive labor. Yes, sir.
Is there significance as to why these are brick columns instead of the usual wood?
The significance. Well, I think the reason that they're brick is because of his money. If they had been wood, they wouldn't be here today. This was done in a style like in Europe, where he was from. And it's done in a style, if you go to New Orleans or Mobile, down there, the brick structures are mortared over with a mixture of oyster shells. Here, they didn't have that. And on the outside, there's a couple of places where you can still see some of them border, the plaster. The plaster was made of sand, gravel, lime, horsehair. They didn't have oyster shells. They used horsehair, charcoal, and molasses to make that mixture, and then smeared it on. And it was about, in places, maybe half-inch thick, the thickest. And there are just a few places where you can still see it, remnants. But the fire was so hot, it just flaked it right off. Yes, sir.
I think the shape of these bricks is really
The shape, the bricks are not a perfect pie shape because they've got a blunt end, but they are in a wedge shape to give you that perfect circle. And if you look at them, one lady stood out here and said, "That is a sexy column." Look at it. Look how it's contoured. And they're all that way. This was done by true artisans. Yes, sir.
Any famous guests stayed
I'm sure there were.
What's the question?
Were any famous guests here? I'm positive there would have been. If you're the richest man in Alabama and you're president of the state senate, I think a couple of people from Huntsville, like Pope, Leroy Pope, where Pope's Tavern's named from. Of course, John Coffey probably was here. Some people think, well, what about Andrew Jackson? Well, they're not related. James Jackson was not related to Andrew Jackson by blood. When James Jackson moved to Nashville, Andrew Jackson was a lawyer and had already, and it's an interesting thing that you may not know, Andrew Jackson won every single battle that he was the commander of. And he did that without one single day of military training. He was never in the military. Never went to an academy. It was sheer will. And as some of his men said, they were deathly afraid of him more than they were of the enemy. Some of them didn't have good things to say about him, like David Crockett. He and Jackson didn't, because he thought Jackson was too cruel. But Jackson made a name for himself and wrote it into the White House. So, they knew each other. But as far as politically, socially, and economically, they did not match. Andrew Jackson was raised very poor. He was a scrabbler. He scrabbled for everything. He went bankrupt, personally bankrupt twice. James Jackson was wealthy, highly educated, and as one author said, had the Midas touch. That means whatever he touched turned to money. We also know that politically they were diametrically opposite. In Alabama, James Jackson was the president of the Whig Party, which is the Republican Party today. And Jackson was the president of the Democratic Party. So you got too much opposition. We know this for a fact, because there are letters proving it. Andrew Jackson would write John Coffey. How is James doing? James would come over or write James. John Coffey would write James Jackson, and he'd say, I'm fine. Tell him I'm fine. And that's how the letters went. But they never spoke to each other again. So John Coffey's plantation is over there. The Armistead plantation, which Millie Wright and her husband owned, Cypress Hill was just across the creek. And then there was the Hood plantation called Woodlawn, where David and Faye Abramson live today. So right here within a 5-mile radius, you had 4 large plantations. Coffey, Jackson, Armistead's from Virginia, and Hood's from Ireland. These Irish and Scot-Irish guys were so powerful. I ran across this phrase in a history book, and it said they belonged to something called the Irish or Celtic Mafia. Not because they were criminals, but because they were so dominant. Wherever they lived, they dominated everything. The culture, the politics, the economics, they were the dominant people. And it's a fact. There's a book, if you want to read a good book, called Born Fighting by Webb, W-E-B-B. It is the history of the Scot-Irish people, of which I'm descended through. Anything else? We know that at one time, there are over 200 graves in the African American slave graveyard. Over 200 unmarked graves. And at various times, according to the census, at one time, I think it was 1860 or 1870, Mrs. Jackson had 70 slaves. She had the oldest slaves in the county, which tells you that this is one of the oldest plantations in the county. No, Doublehead was killed in 1809. Some interesting, one year we were out here, somebody asked about Alex Haley. Alex Haley wrote a book, you wrote Roots. And then he wrote Queen, was writing Queen. And the National Fertilizer Development Center over at TVA invited him. One of their leaders heard him speak somewhere, I'm not sure exactly where, and invited Alex Haley to come to Florence and speak at IFDC. And he basically said this: I will come under one condition. I want to go to the Forks of Cypress. So, one afternoon, I was teaching at Coffee High School, and I got a call to come to the office. Well, everybody goes, ooh, when the kids are called to the office. But when a teacher's called to the office, they all go, what have you done? So I go to the office, and there's a black gentleman there. Stately gentleman, introduced himself. He's a vice president over at IFDC. And he said, you were raised at the Forks of Cypress. I said, yes, sir, I was. How would you like to bring your students to hear Alex Haley speak? And I said, well, when and where? So we loaded on 4 buses. Were you in that group?
I don't think so.
This is one of my former students. She looks normal. That's her mother.
It took me 40 years to get normal.
Took her 40 years to get over this. But we love each other. Anyway, loaded up 4 busloads of kids, went to hear Alex Haley. We were the only high school there. I was stunned when he said that his grandmother was a child here, Florence, Queen. So, at the end of the program, everybody's standing around. I went up to him and I said, "Would you come to coffee to speak?" "Sure, I'll be there tomorrow." We had to go. Now I had to go and tell my principal, Alex Haley's coming. So, I mean, we could have sold tickets forever. But anyway, the auditorium was packed. And he asked to go to the Forks. So we agreed. But I wish Curtis was here because she tells the story. There was a James Jackson IV, who was living in Memphis at the time, was in town and was going to meet some of the family at the Forks Cemetery. Just as the entourage bringing Alex Haley out arrived. So you can imagine the white descendants of James Jackson meet the stately, very highly intelligent black gentleman who says, "By the way, we're cousins." They were. So we know that James Jackson Jr. Was the father of Queen. And he never got to finish the book, by the way. It was finished by a ghostwriter. And I think it would have been better had he finished it. Anything else?
Did they have horse tracks down here run? Were these races significant?
As far as we know, they never raced horses here. They trained horses here. I think, well, let's kind of go this way. The road, as you go out today, you're going to turn left or right. That's Dowdy Road. If you turn left, notice how flat that is. That road didn't exist. The barn here was about double this size, the original barn. The blacksmith shop, we now know, was where my mother and dad lived. We couldn't figure out why we found so many nails and horseshoes. But that's where the blacksmith shop was. And I think, the proximity of the barn and the blacksmith shop with the track in the middle. On both sides of the road, it would have come across the road. In fact, when TVA came into the valley, they made aerial photographs all over the area. And there is a photograph, and I've only seen it one time, of showing the outline of that track on those fields. You can still see it. I grew up hearing it was down in this creek bottom, but I think it did be up here. But that was a training track. If you go to Pope's Tavern, his stopwatch, which was made in Liverpool, England, where he timed his horses, is in Pope's Tavern. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of coming out with a group of descendants. There were about 25 Jackson descendants here for a family reunion. And we had a private tour down here and then went to the cemetery and talked about their folks. They were here from California and North Carolina, Texas. Quite an interesting group. Someone else, before we dismiss.
When was the last time the house was inhabited before the lightning strike that burned it down?
My great uncle lived in Birmingham, and he had a bedroom over there. So he would come and stay a week. But the house had been empty probably for about 5 years before the fire. It was a museum, and it was chock full of furniture. And by the way, we did not have a single piece of original furniture because that was taken out by the family. There are some pieces at Pope's Tavern. I know that. And there are people in Florence, I think Curtis Flowers has a piece or two of original furniture. So we're going to dismiss and meet, for those of you who want to meet, at the family cemetery. Now, we built a new road, and the gentleman who built it's right here, goes right up the field, right up the edge of the woods. I don't think it'd be too good of an idea for you to drive up there. It's still kind of muddy. So we would like for you to go outside and then park along the highway facing the field. Just don't drive through the field, please. We're raising hay. So as long as you don't get stuck, we're in good shape. We need to vacate this place and lock it up so they can turn the horses back out. So, one last opportunity for a question.
Say something.
Yes.
Last Saturday, I was trying to find the walking tour that was supposed to be at UNA. Well, I guess it was canceled. So we just walked up to Post Tavern. There was all these people gathered there. When we went in, we said, "Hey, the walking tour." And they said, "No, this is the Florence family here donating things
That's right.
from the Florence to Post Tavern."
Yes.
So it's
Was it last week?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
it was last week. Yeah, some of the family brought in portraits
Okay,
and other items from the family and donated them to Pope's Tavern. Yeah, and I got to be a part of it.
Okay.
Somebody else? Yes.
Back to the start, Doublehead.
Uh-huh.
I've always heard where he got his name from, but I don't know whether that's right or wrong. If you got any information where Doublehead
It depends on who you talk to. You know who Butch Walker is? Butch Walker has written the book called Doublehead. Butch and I tend to believe that it's because he was two-faced. And that's what killed him. He had a Cherokee face and a white face. Another source said he was schizophrenic. Yeah. I know this. If you do the reading about him, when he went on the warpath, he killed everything that moved. It didn't matter to him if it was man, woman, or child. And their dog, too. They killed them all. That's why he was so feared. He and his guys were bloodthirsty.
Explain once again what we're supposed to be doing, parking where.
If you go out of the forts, turn left. Our field is on the right. And we have a mowed section there that's about this wide. You can just park like you're going to pull into the field. I don't think it'd be a good idea to drive up. If you got some folks that can't maneuver real well and walk, drive on up the road and drive up past the cemetery and go out that way. But it's real muddy. Yeah. The question is, was this ever occupied by the Union? Yes, both armies spent a number of times here. There are a number of instances about when Union cavalry came here to ransack the house. And they stole the horses too. They stole a lot of horses. Somebody else?
Mr. Wallace,
Yes.
we want to know.
We want to know.
Did you ever get the silver out of the house?
No. The only time we got the silver out is after the fire was over. It was no good after that.
Well, would it just been a
Pile, it was just melted glob. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for coming out. And we will do this again in November for those who are interested.
She said, what now?
We will be doing it again in November.
Again in November, October, November.
Yes.
See Miss Linda, raise your hand if you want a copy of that book.
Yes, I will get in touch with Miss Curtis. Okay, I'll meet you at the table. Okay. I thought about that, and I'm like, I got to ask him, whatever happened with the silver?